With only $2,400 left in her checking account and a termination letter clutched in her shaking hands, 34-year-old Olivia Parker made what everyone in her life called a complete mental breakdown decision when she spent her last savings on a condemned 1920s post office building at a county auction for $1,800. And what she discovered behind a forgotten mail sorting slot wouldn't just give her purpose beyond her shattered career, it would uncover hundreds of undelivered government letters spanning 5 decades that contained everything from wartime draft notices to unclaimed veteran benefits, bringing federal investigators and national media to her doorstep within 24 hours of her unexpected discovery. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows of Olivia's small apartment, illuminating the termination letter that lay on her kitchen counter like an unwelcome guest. Position eliminated, effective immediately. The corporate speak couldn't disguise the devastating reality. After 12 years of dedicated service as a library archivist at the Westbrook Historical Society, budget cuts had left her jobless with barely a month's savings to her name. Olivia pushed a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and glanced at the digital clock on her microwave, 4:37 p.m. She had exactly 23 days before rent was due on an apartment she could no longer afford. At 34, with a master's degree in library science and a specialization in historical document preservation, Olivia had never imagined her carefully constructed life would collapse so completely. "This can't be happening," she whispered to the empty room, the silence her only response. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her career preserving other people's histories, and now her own future was evaporating before her eyes. Westbrook, the mid-sized town she'd called home since college, had been hit hard by manufacturing closures over the past 5 years. The Historical Society's funding had been slashed repeatedly, but somehow Olivia had always survived the cuts, until today. The termination letter explained that the board had decided to prioritize digital initiatives over physical archives, effectively declaring her expertise obsolete in one clinical paragraph. Olivia's apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a converted Victorian house, had once felt like a cozy haven. Now its walls seemed to close in, reminding her of impending homelessness. Her bookshelves, packed with carefully curated volumes on archival methods, historical preservation, and local history, suddenly looked like an indulgence she could no longer justify. Opening her laptop, Olivia grimly assessed her financial situation. The severance package amounted to just 3 weeks' pay, $2,400 after taxes. Her monthly rent was $950, utilities around $200, and her student loan payment another $310. Even with ruthless budget cutting, she had perhaps 2 months before complete financial collapse. The job market for archivists had never been robust, but now it seemed virtually non-existent. Her specialized skills, cataloging historical documents, creating preservation systems for fragile materials, curating exhibits of local significance, had limited application outside academic or museum settings, and those institutions were cutting positions, not adding them. As evening approached, Olivia methodically applied for every remotely relevant position within a 100-mile radius. Librarian assistant, records clerk, museum tour guide. Each application felt like shouting into a void. Most required relocation, something she couldn't afford without first securing the position. Her phone rang, jolting her from the spiral of increasingly desperate job searches. "Olivia, it's Rachel. I just heard what happened. Are you okay?" Her friend's voice carried genuine concern. Rachel Martinez had been Olivia's closest friend since graduate school. Now the head librarian at Westbrook Community College, Rachel, had offered Olivia a position multiple times over the years, but the Historical Society had always paid better. That irony now felt like cosmic mockery. "I've been better," Olivia admitted, her voice cracking slightly. 12 years, Rachel. 12 years cataloguing every historical document in 3 counties, and they let me go with a form letter and 3 weeks severance. "It's outrageous," Rachel agreed. "Listen, I don't have a full-time position, budget freezes, but I could get you some part-time cataloguing work, 20 hours a week maybe." Olivia calculated quickly. Part-time library work would barely cover her student loans and utilities, let alone rent and food. "I appreciate that, Rachel, I really do, but—" "I know it's not enough," Rachel finished. But it's something while you figure out next steps. And listen, I might have something else that could interest you. Are you still following the county auctions?" The question caught Olivia off guard. County property auctions had been a professional interest. The Historical Society occasionally bid on properties with historical significance. She'd developed a knack for spotting potential in overlooked buildings. "Not really, not since the budget cuts started." "Why?" "There's an auction tomorrow. The old Millfield post office is on the block. Starting bid is ridiculously low, $1,500. It's been abandoned for years, but the building is pure 1920s architecture. I immediately thought of you when I saw the listing." "Rachel, I just lost my job. I can't buy a building." "Hear me out. The property taxes are delinquent, which is why it's being auctioned. But the building itself is on the historical register, which means restoration grants are available. You always talked about opening your own archival consulting business someday. This could be your someday, just arriving at an inconvenient time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The suggestion seemed absurd, buying a building when she could barely afford groceries. Yet something about it resonated with a part of Olivia that wasn't ready to surrender to defeat. "Send me the listing," she said finally. "No promises, but I'll look." After hanging up, Olivia stared at her reflection in the darkening window. The woman looking back seemed older than her 34 years, worry lines forming around eyes that had spent too long examining faded documents in poor light. Was this really what her life had come to? Applying for jobs she was overqualified for while contemplating homelessness. When Rachel's email arrived with the auction listing, Olivia clicked it with minimal expectations. The photographs loaded, slowly, revealing a brick building with arched windows and an ornate facade that spoke to an era when public buildings were designed with civic pride. The Millfield Post Office had served the community from 1923 until 1978, when postal operations had moved to a larger facility. Since then, it had briefly housed various businesses before sitting vacant for the past decade. Despite its neglect, the architectural details remained impressive. Detailed brickwork, limestone accents, and the original United States Post Office engraving above the entrance. The interior photos showed water damage, peeling paint, and outdated electrical systems, but also oak counters, brass fixtures, and a sorting room with built-in wooden cubbies that had survived the decades remarkably intact. The location was another surprise. Millfield was a small community about 40 minutes from Westbrook, once a thriving mill town, but now struggling after the textile industry's collapse. Property values there were a fraction of Westbrook's, making the starting bid of $7,500 less shocking than it would have been in her current location. Against her better judgment, Olivia found herself researching restoration grants for historical buildings well past midnight. The National Trust for Historical Preservation offered matching funds for qualifying projects. The State Historical Commission had renovation tax credits. There were even specific grants for converting historical buildings into educational or community spaces. By morning, What had seemed like an absurd suggestion had transformed into a desperate possibility. Olivia had always been methodical, cautious. Some ex-boyfriends had called her boring, but perhaps caution had led her to this precipice. Perhaps the answer wasn't another safe job application, but a complete change of direction. The auction was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the county courthouse. Olivia spent the morning making calculations, researching property taxes in Millfield, and estimating minimum renovation costs to make the building habitable. The numbers were daunting, but not entirely impossible if she secured grants, lived extremely frugally, and generated some income quickly. At noon, she made her decision. She would attend the auction, set a maximum bid of $2,000, and walk away if the bidding exceeded that amount. It was still an irresponsible use of her dwindling funds, but something about the old post office called to her in a way she couldn't entirely rationalize. The county courthouse was an imposing limestone building with echoing hallways and the distinct smell of old paper and floor polish. Olivia found the auction room easily, following the small crowd of people clutching bid paddles and property listings. Most attendees appeared to be contractors or investors, discussing potential profits and renovation costs with the casual confidence of experienced property flippers. Olivia felt conspicuously out of place in her cardigan and sensible shoes, clutching her folder of hastily assembled research like a shield. The auctioneer, a brisk woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, began promptly at 2 p.m. The first several properties, vacant lots, a foreclosed ranch house, an abandoned gas station, sold quickly to contractors who seemed to know each other through nods of recognition. When the Millfield post office came up, Olivia's heart hammered so loudly she was certain the entire room could hear it. The auctioneer displayed photos on a projector screen, highlighting the historical designation and zoning classification. Item 17. Former United States Post Office Building, 421 Main Street, Millfield. Built 1923, approximately 200 square feet. Zoned mixed-use commercial residential. Property requires significant renovation. Starting bid $1,500. Do I have $500? Olivia raised her paddle with a shaking hand, immediately regretting the impulsive action. $1,500 from bidder number 34. The auctioneer noted. Do I have $600? A man in a flannel shirt and work boots raised his paddle casually. $1,600? $1,700, the auctioneer prompted. Olivia raised her paddle again, heart pounding. $1,700 from bidder 34. Do I have $1,800? The man in flannel conferred briefly with his companion, then shook his head slightly. Going once at $1,700, going twice. Just as the auctioneer prepared to close the bidding, another voice called out. $800. A woman in the back, professionally dressed in a real estate blazer, had entered the bidding. Olivia felt her hopes crumbling. She had set $2,000 as her absolute maximum, but even that would leave her with minimal funds for immediate necessities. $1,900, Olivia counted, feeling reckless and terrified simultaneously. The real estate agent frowned, checked her phone, and shook her head. $1,900 from bidder 34, going once, going twice. Sold to bidder 34 for $1,900. A strange numbness washed over Olivia. She had just spent nearly all her remaining money on a condemned building in a town where she didn't live, with no clear plan for what came next. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was financial suicide, while another part felt an unexpected thrill of possibility. The paperwork took another hour, during which Olivia signed countless forms, transferring ownership and assuming responsibility for the property's back taxes, which thankfully had been included in the auction information and factored into her calculations. The county clerk, a sympathetic woman named Mrs. Henderson, walked her through the process with surprising kindness. First auction? Mrs. Henderson asked, as Olivia signed the final document. Is it that obvious? Most professionals don't read every word of the contract, she said with a gentle smile, or look quite so shell-shocked when they win. The Millfield Post Office is a beautiful building, been sitting empty too long. You're familiar with it? My father was the postmaster there for 30 years, back when mail was the community's lifeline. That building has stories in its walls. She handed Olivia the deed and a set of ancient-looking keys. Good luck, dear. I hope you bring it back to life. Driving the 40 minutes to Millfield, Olivia alternated between exhilaration and panic. The rational archivist in her documented each emotion clinically. Fear of financial ruin, excitement about potential, anxiety about unknown challenges ahead. By the time she pulled up in front of her new property, the emotions had blended into a strange calm of acceptance. Whatever happened next, she had committed herself to this path. The Millfield Post Office stood on the corner of Main Street and Elm, its brick facade darkened by decades of neglect, but still maintaining a dignified presence. The surrounding buildings, a mix of small businesses, many with for-lease signs, and converted residences, seemed to defer to its architectural significance. The first key she tried stuck in the lock, requiring gentle persuasion before the heavy front door swung open with a dramatic creak. The smell hit her immediately. Dust, mildew, old paper, and something unidentifiable that spoke of abandonment. Particles danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through dirt-covered windows, illuminating a space frozen in time. The main lobby featured a high ceiling with ornate molding, now peeling and water-stained. The customer service counter stretched along one wall, its oak surface dulled by time but still beautiful beneath the grime. Behind it, hundreds of brass mailboxes gleamed dully, some still displaying faded name cards from decades past. Olivia moved deeper into the building, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The postmaster's office still contained a massive desk and empty filing cabinets. The sorting room behind the main lobby housed wooden tables and an elaborate system of cubbies, slots, and sorting shelves that climbed to the ceiling. The building was larger than it had appeared in the photos, with a basement accessed by a narrow staircase and a second floor that had apparently been used for administrative purposes. Every space needed work. The electrical system was dangerously outdated, plumbing questionable at best, and certain areas showed concerning water damage. But the bones of the building remained sound, the craftsmanship evident even beneath decades of neglect. As Olivia explored, making mental notes of immediate priorities, she found herself drawn to the mail sorting system. Unlike modern facilities, designed for efficiency, this system had been built for a different era, when letters were handled individually with care and attention. The wooden sorting station contained hundreds of slots, each labeled with streets, rural routes, and specialized categories. One slot in particular caught her attention, larger than the others, and positioned oddly at the end of the sorting station. Its label had faded beyond recognition, but something about its placement seemed deliberate, separate from the logical flow of the other categories. When she ran her hand along its surface, she noticed that unlike the other slots, which opened directly to sorting bins, this one seemed to extend deeper into the wall. Curiosity piqued, Olivia retrieved her flashlight from the emergency kit in her car and examined the slot more carefully. When she shined the light inside, instead of seeing the back of a mail bin, she glimpsed what appeared to be open space beyond. "That can't be right," she murmured to herself, bending to look more carefully. The slot was large enough to admit her arm up to the elbow. When she reached inside, expecting to find the back of the compartment, her hand instead encountered empty space. The slot wasn't a slot at all. It was a passage that extended beyond the sorting room wall. Heart racing with the thrill of discovery, Olivia examined the wall more carefully. What she had assumed was a solid dividing wall between rooms showed subtle signs of modification. The baseboard didn't quite match, the paint color was slightly different, and the wallpaper pattern didn't align perfectly. "It's a false wall," she whispered, archaeological instincts kicking in. Further inspection revealed that a section of the wall adjacent to the mysterious slot moved slightly when pressed. After several minutes of careful pressure and examination, Olivia found a recessed latch mechanism concealed within the ornate trim. When activated, it released a catch, allowing a door-sized section of the wall to swing inward with surprising ease. The space beyond was dark and still. Olivia's flashlight beam cut through decades of undisturbed dust, illuminating what appeared to be a hidden room approximately 10 feet square. Unlike the rest of the building, which had been cleared of most original furnishings, this space remained exactly as it had been left, whenever that had been. Metal shelving lined 3 walls from floor to ceiling, and on those shelves, organized with bureaucratic precision, were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of letters, packages, and official-looking envelopes. Many bore government seals and urgent stamps. Others displayed military markings. Some were bundled by type, others arranged chronologically. All appeared to be unopened. Olivia approached the nearest shelf with professional reverence, her archivist training overriding her shock. The documents appeared to span decades, the earliest dating back to 1940, the most recent from 1978, around when the post office had ceased operations. Each shelf was meticulously labeled: draft notices, Veterans Affairs, Treasury Department, security clearance, federal investigations. With gloved hands, an archivist's habit she never traveled without, Olivia carefully examined several envelopes without opening them. They were addressed to residents of Millfield and surrounding communities, but for some reason they had never been delivered. Instead, they had been systematically diverted to this hidden room and preserved. The implications began to dawn on her slowly, then with increasing alarm. These weren't misplaced letters or administrative overflows. This was deliberate interception of government correspondence spanning nearly 4 decades. Someone, perhaps multiple people over the years, had systematically prevented these official communications from reaching their intended recipients. As the full weight of her discovery settled on her shoulders, Olivia realized she was facing a decision with far-reaching consequences. These documents potentially represented thousands of altered lives, draft notices never received, benefits never claimed, investigations never responded to. The historical significance was enormous, but so were the ethical and potentially legal implications. Olivia carefully backed out of the room, securing the hidden door as she found it. Whatever this was, conspiracy, crime, or something more complex, it required careful consideration before proceeding. She locked the building with hands that had begun to tremble not from fear, but from the historian's recognition that she had stumbled upon something that would rewrite a community's understanding of its past. Sitting in her car outside the post office, Olivia called the only person she trusted with the discovery of this magnitude. "Rachel, it's me. You're not going to believe what I just found." The following morning dawned with a clarity Olivia hadn't experienced since receiving her termination notice. She had spent the night researching postal regulations, federal document handling protocols, and the history of Millfield's postal service. Rachel had advised caution. This discovery could have implications beyond anything either of them had encountered professionally. "This isn't just historical significance," Rachel had warned. "If someone deliberately intercepted federal communications, that's potentially criminal, even decades later. You need to involve proper authorities." Olivia had slept little, weighing her responsibilities as both a historian and a citizen. By morning, her path forward was clear. She would document everything meticulously before notification, creating a proper historical record while ensuring all legal protocols were followed. Returning to the post office with proper archival supplies, acid-free boxes, cotton gloves, documentation forms, a professional camera, Olivia set about creating a preliminary inventory of the hidden room's contents. Each shelf received systematic documentation, with representative samples photographed to establish the scope and nature of the materials without disturbing the collection unnecessarily. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and disturbing. The intercepted communications fell into distinct categories that suggested intentional selection rather than random diversion. Draft notices formed the largest category, particularly from 1940, 1945, and 1965 to 1972. Veterans' benefits notifications were similarly numerous, spanning the entire period. Tax liens, security clearance investigations, and federal employment communications formed smaller but significant categories. By mid-afternoon, Olivia had compiled enough documentation to understand the basic scope of what she was dealing with. The question of why remained unanswered, but the pattern suggested someone with access to mail sorting had been deliberately shielding certain community members from government obligations, while simultaneously preventing others from receiving benefits to which they were entitled. With her preliminary documentation complete, Olivia made the call she had been dreading, yet knew was necessary. United States Postal Inspection Service, how may I direct your call? My name is Olivia Parker. I've recently purchased the former Millfield Post Office building at auction, and I've discovered what appears to be a hidden room containing thousands of undelivered government communications dating from 1940 to 1978. I believe this requires official investigation. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Ms. Parker, did you say undelivered government communications spanning 4 decades? Yes, draft notices, VA benefits, Treasury Department communications, security clearance documents, all apparently diverted deliberately to a hidden room rather than delivered to recipients. Please don't touch anything further. A postal inspector will contact you within the hour. True to their word, Olivia's phone rang 40 minutes later. The caller identified himself as Inspector Robert Martinez from the Postal Inspection Service's Cleveland Field Office. His tone conveyed professional interest rather than accusation. Ms. Parker, I understand you've made an unusual discovery. Can you provide more details about how you found these materials and their current condition? Olivia explained the circumstances. The auction purchase, exploration of the building, discovery of the false wall, and her preliminary documentation efforts. You have an archival background? He asked, noting her methodical approach. I was an archivist with the Westbrook Historical Society until recently. That explains your handling procedures. Most people would have just started opening envelopes. His tone shifted slightly. Ms. Parker, based on your description, this discovery potentially involves multiple federal agencies. I'm going to arrange for a joint response team to secure and assess these materials. Can you remain on site until they arrive? Of course. How soon should I expect them? Given the historical significance and multiple agency involvement, a team will be dispatched immediately. They should reach you within 3 to 4 hours. As promised, by early evening, the quiet street outside the Millfield Post Office had transformed into an impromptu command center. 2 Postal Inspection Service vehicles, an FBI Evidence Response Team van, and representatives from the National Archives had arrived in quick succession. Inspector Martinez, a serious man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses, introduced himself and the interagency team. Ms. Parker, thank you for handling this discovery so professionally. This is Special Agent Keisha Williams. From the FBI, Dr. Alan Chen from the National Archives, and my colleague, Inspector Sarah Nichols. The team followed Olivia through the building to the hidden room. their expressions shifting from professional interest to astonishment as she demonstrated the concealed mechanism and revealed the room's contents. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Chen murmured, surveying the shelves of preserved correspondence with a historian's reverence. "A deliberate diversion operation spanning multiple administrations, preserved intact." Special Agent Williams was already documenting the scene, her focus more investigative. The systematic nature suggests organization beyond a single individual. This would have required cooperation across postal staff over decades. As the federal team began their formal assessment, Inspector Martinez drew Olivia aside. "Ms. Parker, I need to ask, have you informed anyone else about this discovery?" "Just my friend Rachel Martinez, head librarian at Westbrook Community College. She advised me to contact authorities immediately." "Good. We'll need a complete statement from you and potentially ongoing consultation, given your archival expertise. This investigation will likely become complex." By midnight, the initial assessment had confirmed Olivia's findings while expanding their significance. The hidden room contained approximately 3,700 pieces of undelivered official mail spanning 38 years. The systematic nature of the diversion suggested a coordinated effort involving multiple postal employees over decades. "Ms. Parker," Inspector Martinez said as the team prepared to secure the site overnight, "we'll need to establish a formal presence here for several weeks while we process this evidence. As the property owner, we'd like to compensate you for access and potentially for your professional consultation, given your background." "You want to hire me?" Olivia asked, struggling to process this unexpected development. "The National Archives has expressed particular interest in your participation. This represents both a federal investigation and a significant historical discovery. Your expertise bridges both aspects." As Olivia drove back to her apartment that night, the full impact of the day's events began to settle over her. 24 hours earlier, she had been unemployed and facing financial ruin. Now she had become the owner of a historical building, containing evidence of what might be one of the most unusual postal conspiracies in American history. For the first time since receiving her termination notice, Olivia felt something she had almost forgotten: purpose. Whatever secrets the Millfield post office still held, she was now inextricably connected to their revelation. The building she had purchased in desperation might become not just her financial salvation, but her most significant professional contribution. As she drifted towards sleep, Olivia wondered about the people behind those undelivered letters, both those who had diverted them and those who had never received them, whose lives had been altered by this systematic interference. What had motivated decades of postal workers to participate in this conspiracy of silence? Tomorrow would begin the painstaking process of answering those questions, uncovering the human stories behind the official correspondence. For tonight, it was enough to know that sometimes the most desperate decisions lead to the most unexpected discoveries. The morning sunlight streamed through the arched windows of the Millfield post office, casting golden rectangles across the dusty marble floor. Olivia Parker stood in the center of the main lobby, watching the federal investigation team methodically process the hidden room's contents. It had been 3 days since her discovery, and the small building now hummed with activity that belied its decades of abandonment. Inspector Robert Martinez approached, offering a cup of coffee from the makeshift refreshment station the team had established in the former postmaster's office. "Sleep any better last night?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "Not really," Olivia admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "It's hard to shut off my brain after spending all day cataloguing these letters. Each one represents someone's life potentially altered. The hidden room had yielded far more than either of them had initially estimated. Beyond the government communications, They had discovered personal letters diverted for reasons that remained unclear, birthday cards never received, college acceptance letters never celebrated, condolences never read. The scope of human impact was proving both broader and more profound than anyone had anticipated. "Dr. Chen wants to speak with you," Martinez said, gesturing toward the National Archives representative who had become a fixture at the site. Something about historical context. Dr. Alan Chen had established a workstation in what had once been the post office's break room, surrounded by reference materials and a laptop connected to the National Archives databases. His excitement was barely contained beneath his professional demeanor. "Ms. Parker, I've been researching Millfield's history to establish context for our findings," he began as Olivia approached. "The patterns we're seeing correlate with significant moments in both local and national history." He displayed a timeline he had constructed, highlighting the concentration of diverted draft notices during World War II and Vietnam, alongside economic communications during the Depression recovery and various economic downturns. The selective nature of the diversion suggests this wasn't random, Dr. Chen continued. Someone, or multiple someones, was making deliberate choices about which community members received certain communications. "Protecting some while punishing others," Olivia suggested, the historian in her already constructing possible narratives. "That's one possibility, but there might be more complex motivations," Dr. Chen replied. "For instance, we've found clusters of diverted communications to Millfield's immigrant communities during periods of heightened xenophobia, and diverted draft notices show a pattern that suggests protection of essential local workers during wartime." The implications were becoming clearer yet more complicated. What they were uncovering wasn't simply postal fraud or dereliction of duty. It was potentially a decades-long community protection operation conducted through the mail system. As Olivia processed this perspective, Special Agent Keisha Williams from the FBI joined their conversation. Unlike Dr. Chen's historical enthusiasm, Agent Williams brought investigative pragmatism to the discovery. "While the historical patterns are fascinating," she noted, "we're also establishing a chain of custody. These diversions required institutional knowledge across generations of postal workers. Someone trained their replacements to maintain this system." The realization had been growing in Olivia's mind as well. This wasn't the work of a single disgruntled postal worker or a temporary disruption. The hidden room's contents spanned too many years, continued through too many administrative changes to be anything but an organized effort, passed from one generation of postal workers to the next. "Have you identified who might have been involved?" Olivia asked. Agent Williams shook her head. "We're compiling employment records spanning 1940 to 1978. Many former employees are deceased, but we've identified several still living in the region. Interviews will begin tomorrow." As the federal team continued their methodical work, Olivia found herself drawn to the building itself. Beyond the hidden room, the Millfield post office had stories embedded in its very structure. While the investigation focused on the diverted mail, Olivia began a parallel exploration of the building's architectural and functional history. The basement, accessed by a narrow staircase near the rear loading dock, revealed another dimension of the postal facility's operations. Unlike the public spaces designed with classical elegance, the basement was purely utilitarian. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, and industrial shelving. Yet, even here, Olivia found evidence of careful organization and systematic operations. One section contained maintenance records dating back to the building's construction, meticulously documenting every repair, upgrade, and modification. Another held postal regulations manuals spanning decades, many with handwritten annotations in margins. A third area contained what appeared to be personnel files, though most had been officially removed when the facility closed. It was in a dusty corner behind an antiquated boiler that Olivia found something unexpected, a leather-bound journal wedged between pipes. Unlike the official documentation throughout the building, this appeared personal, its worn cover suggesting frequent handling. Heart quickening with the thrill of discovery, Olivia carefully extracted the journal and brought it upstairs to the better light. The first page bore a simple inscription: Eleanor Matthews, Postmaster Assistant, 1943. The journal's entries began formally, documenting daily operations and staffing challenges during wartime when many postal workers had been drafted. But as Olivia carefully turned the yellowed pages, the entries became more personal, revealing the human story behind the official postal operations. March 17, 1943, one entry read, "Draft notice arrived for Thomas Cahill today. His wife Mary just delivered their 4th child last week, and he's the only mechanic left who can maintain the mill equipment. If he goes, the mill might close, and 30 families will lose their income. After discussing with Postmaster Green, the notice has been placed in the special holding room. God forgive us, but some letters carry too high a price." Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she realized what she was reading, a first-hand account from one of the people responsible for establishing the mail diversion system. The journal potentially provided the why behind their discovery, the human reasoning that had led postal workers to interfere with federal communications. Before she could read further, the post office's front door opened, admitting an elderly man who moved with the deliberate care of advanced age, but whose eyes remained sharp and observant. He surveyed the investigation activity with a mixture of curiosity and what appeared to be resignation. Inspector Martinez approached him immediately. "Sir, this is an active federal investigation site. I'm afraid the building isn't open to the public." The man nodded politely. "I'm well aware of what's happening here. That's why I've come. My name is Howard Green. My father was William Green, postmaster of Millfield from 1940 to 1967. I believe your team has questions that I might be able to answer." The room fell silent as the implications of this visitor's identity registered. Howard Green would have grown up with the post office as his second home during the exact period when the mail diversion system was established and maintained. Agent Williams stepped forward. "Mr. Green, we would very much like to speak with you. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement?" "That's why I'm here," he replied simply. "When I heard about the discovery, I knew it was time for the truth to be told. My father started it, you see, the special collection. He never called it diversion or interference. He called it community protection." Olivia glanced down at Eleanor, Matthew's journal in her hands, then back at Howard Green. "I think I just found your father's accomplice," she said, holding up the journal. Green's eyes widened in recognition. "Eleanor's journal! We thought it had been destroyed when the facility closed. She was my father's right hand, the only one he trusted completely when it began." Within an hour, a formal interview had been arranged in the postmaster's office. Howard Green, age 87, sat across from Agent Williams and Inspector Martinez, with Dr. Chen and Olivia present to provide historical context. Green had waived his right to an attorney, stating he had nothing to hide after all these years. "It began during World War II, Green explained, his voice strong despite his years. Millfield was a manufacturing town then. Textiles, machinery, parts, eventually wartime production. The first draft was pulling too many essential workers from the community. My father saw the consequences immediately. Families without income, production falling, the entire town's economy at risk. He described how his father, as postmaster, had made a fateful decision to delay, not destroy, certain draft notices, creating a buffer that allowed critical workers to train replacements before reporting for service. He always intended it to be temporary, Green continued, a way to manage the flow of manpower from the community without crippling local production. Every man whose notice was delayed eventually served, just on a timeline that protected Millfield from economic collapse. But it didn't end after the war, Agent Williams noted, consulting her timeline. Green nodded solemnly. Once the system was established, other situations arose. Veterans returning home faced foreclosures while their benefit applications languished in bureaucracy. My father began intercepting certain foreclosure notices, creating time for benefits to be processed. Then came the Red Scare, loyalty investigations, targeting immigrants who had lived in Millfield for decades, contributing to the community. More letters diverted, more families protected. As Green spoke, Olivia realized they were uncovering not just postal fraud, but an alternate system of community governance, one where local postal officials had made judgment calls about which federal communications would help or harm their community. It became institutionalized, Green admitted. Each postmaster trained their successor. The hidden room was constructed during a building renovation in 1951, replacing the more haphazard storage methods of the early years. By the time my father retired, the special collection process was simply part of how the Millfield Post Office operated. Who knew about this beyond postal employees? Inspector Martinez asked. Very few people directly, though I suspect many in town understood something was happening. The mayor knew. There was coordination when certain situations arose. The police chief was informed in limited circumstances, but most residents remained unaware, experiencing only the effects. A community that somehow weathered economic downturns and social upheavals better than our neighbors. Dr. Chen, who had been taking extensive notes, looked up with a historian's gleam in his eye. Mr. Green, you're describing what amounts to a community resilience system operating outside official channels. From a historical perspective, this is extraordinary. Green smiled faintly. We never used such grand terms. My father simply called it looking after our own. Millfield was isolated in many ways, geographically remote, economically vulnerable. Federal policies created in Washington often failed to account for local realities. The special collection room became a buffer between policy and people. Yet eventually it ended, Olivia observed, remembering that the most recent diverted letters dated to 1978 when the post office had closed. Times changed, Green acknowledged. The new regional facility used automated sorting systems. The personal connection between postal workers and community was lost. And truthfully, by the 1970s, Millfield was already declining as manufacturing moved overseas. There were fewer essential workers to protect, fewer community institutions to preserve. As the interview continued, Olivia found herself stepping back, observing the human dynamics with growing fascination. The federal investigators maintained professional detachment, yet their questions revealed the complexity of their position, tasked with investigating what was technically criminal interference with federal communications, yet confronted with motives that were undeniably community-minded. Dr. Chen approached the situation with an academic's appreciation for historical context, seeing patterns that connected Millfield's experience to broader American themes of local autonomy versus federal authority, and Howard Green himself embodied the complexity, neither apologetic nor defiant, simply a witness to a community solution that had emerged in response to perceived systemic failures. By late afternoon, Green's formal statement had been recorded, and he prepared to leave. Before departing, he approached Olivia directly. "You're the new owner," he stated rather than asked. "What do you plan to do with this building now that its secrets are exposed?" The question caught Olivia off guard. In the whirlwind of discovery and investigation, she had hardly considered her original purpose in purchasing the property. "I haven't decided," she admitted. "I bought it rather impulsively after losing my job." Green nodded thoughtfully. Buildings like this were once the heart of their communities, not just for services rendered, but for what they represented: continuity, reliability, connection. Even with its complicated history, perhaps because of it, this place deserves a future that honors its past. After Green departed, Inspector Martinez confirmed that the investigation would continue for at least another 2 weeks. "We need to verify Mr. Green's account, interview other living postal workers from the period, and complete documentation of all diverted communications." "What happens after that?" Olivia asked, suddenly concerned about her access to the upper building she technically owned, but which had been temporarily commandeered by federal authorities. "That's partly up to you," Martinez replied. "Once evidence collection is complete, the building returns to your control. The diverted mail itself is more complicated. Technically, it should still be delivered to intended recipients or their descendants. The Postal Service never loses its obligation to deliver the mail, even decades late." This perspective shifted something in Olivia's thinking. The letters weren't just historical artifacts or evidence of wrongdoing. They were interrupted communications, messages sent but never received, human connections suspended in time. That evening, after the federal team had secured the site and departed for their hotel accommodations in Westbrook, Olivia remained behind. With proper authorization from Inspector Martinez, she continued exploring the building that was technically her home and business property, though it had temporarily become the center of a federal investigation. The second floor, which had received less attention from investigators focused on the hidden room, revealed new dimensions of the post office's history. What had once been administrative offices had been personalized by generations of postal workers. Faded photographs still hung. In some rooms, desks contained forgotten personal items, and bulletin boards preserved notices from various eras. In what appeared to have been a break room, Olivia found a wall of photographs documenting staff gatherings, holiday parties, and community events spanning decades. Studying these images, she began recognizing faces: a younger William Green, Eleanor Matthews from the Journal, and other postal workers who had participated in the mail diversion system. These weren't the faces of conspirators or criminals. They were community members, neighbors who had made complex ethical choices in response to what they perceived as threats to their community's well-being. In one photograph, from what appeared to be the 1950s, the entire postal staff stood proudly in front of the building, flanked by town officials and business leaders, all potentially complicit in or beneficiaries of the special collection system. As night fell, Olivia found herself sitting at the postmaster's desk. Eleanor Matthews' journal open before her, illuminated by a modern LED lantern. The journal entries became increasingly reflective as the years progressed, documenting not just postal operations, but the moral calculations behind specific diversion decisions. July 15th, 1953. One entry read, "Security clearance investigation. Notice for Professor Abramson arrived today. His crime is having attended socialist meetings as a graduate student in the 1930s. Now he teaches mathematics at the community college and tutors half the town's children for free. The investigation would destroy his reputation regardless of outcome. Another for the special collection. Sometimes protection requires difficult choices." The more Olivia read, the more she understood the complex moral territory the postal workers had navigated. They hadn't simply diverted mail capriciously or for personal gain. Each decision appeared carefully weighed against community impact, with clear, though unorthodox ethical guidelines. Around midnight, Olivia finally closed the journal and sat in the darkness of the historic building, listening to its settling noises and contemplating its significance. When she had impulsively purchased the property, she had seen it merely as a potential business location and residence. Now she understood it represented something far more profound, a physical embodiment of the tension between institutional authority and community autonomy, between letter of the law and human need. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Rachel. "How's it going? News reports are starting to appear about a major historical discovery in Millfield. You're about to be famous." The media dimension hadn't occurred to Olivia. Of course, a discovery of this magnitude wouldn't remain contained to federal investigators and historians. Soon the story would spread. A hidden room, thousands of diverted government communications, a multi-generational postal conspiracy. How would that narrative be shaped? Who would control the telling? These questions followed Olivia as she finally left the building around 1 a.m., securing it according to protocols established by the investigation team. Driving back to her apartment in Westbrook, she realized her perspective had fundamentally shifted. She had entered this situation as a desperate, unemployed archivist, making a last-ditch financial gamble. Now she found herself the custodian of not just a building, but a community's complicated history. By morning, Olivia's prediction about media interest proved accurate. Local news vans had already positioned themselves outside the Millfield post office when she arrived. Inspector Martinez met her at the side entrance, helping her navigate past reporters shouting questions about postal conspiracy and federal investigation. "We've prepared a statement," Martinez explained once they were safely inside. "Dr. Chen will handle the historical perspective. I'll address the investigation parameters, and we'd like you to briefly explain the discovery circumstances. Nothing about operational details or specific letters." The press conference was held on the post office steps at noon. Dr. Chen spoke eloquently about the historical significance of the discovery, framing it within the context of community responses to federal policies during transformative periods in American history. Inspector Martinez provided a factual overview of the investigation without revealing specific findings. When Olivia's turn came, she found herself unexpectedly emotional. 3 days ago, I was an unemployed archivist who purchased this building. Out of financial desperation, she began candidly. What I discovered inside wasn't just diverted mail, but a community's story, complex, challenging, and profoundly human. As the investigation continues, I hope we all remember that behind every letter was a person. Behind every decision, a human calculation about right and wrong, protection and harm. The statement wasn't what she had rehearsed with the federal team, but it felt necessary. A reminder that beneath the sensational headlines lay human stories that deserved nuanced understanding. After the press conference, Olivia retreated inside to continue working with the investigation team. Dr. Chen approached her with newfound respect. "That was well said," he offered. "Too often, historical discoveries become abstracted from their human context. You reminded everyone what's really at stake here." The day's work focused on cataloging and contextualizing specific categories of diverted mail. Olivia worked primarily with correspondence related to veterans' benefits, hundreds of letters, notifying Millfield residents about benefits they were entitled to but had apparently never received. This contradicts the community protection narrative, Agent Williams noted, reviewing the category. Withholding benefit notifications harmed veterans rather than helping them. Olivia had been pondering the same contradiction, unless... She retrieved Eleanor Matthews' journal, flipping to entries from the post-war period. Listen to this entry, from September 1946. Benefits notifications arrived for 17 veterans today, all for minimal amounts that would disqualify recipients. From local support programs providing greater assistance. After consultation with Mayor Davies and the Veterans Committee, these have been placed in special collection. Local benefits will continue until federal provisions improve. They were comparing benefit programs, Dr. Chen realized, diverting federal notifications when local support was more generous. A cost-benefit analysis, Agent Williams said, clearly struggling between professional disapproval of the interference and reluctant admiration for the strategic thinking involved. As the afternoon progressed, Olivia found herself increasingly functioning as a bridge between the federal investigators' procedural focus and the historical context that explained the diverted mail system. Her archival training provided the technical vocabulary for documentation, while her growing understanding of Millfield's history offered interpretive frameworks. Around 4 p.m., an unexpected visitor arrived. Sarah Henderson, the elderly county clerk who had processed Olivia's property purchase days earlier. Inspector Martinez initially moved to redirect her, but Olivia intervened. Mrs. Henderson mentioned a personal connection to the building when I bought it, she explained. Her father was postmaster here. James Henderson, Mrs. Henderson. Confirmed. Postmaster from 1967 to 1978. After William Green retired, I saw the news reports and thought I might be of assistance. Mrs. Henderson's arrival proved invaluable. As William Green's successor, her father had maintained the special collection system through its final decade. More importantly, she had worked as a postal clerk herself during summer breaks from college in the early 1970s and had direct knowledge of how diversion decisions were made during the Vietnam era. It wasn't just draft notices by then, she explained during her formal interview. The system had evolved to include selective service communications, federal investigations of anti-war activists, surveillance notifications. The scope had expanded with each new perceived threat to community autonomy. Were you personally involved in diverting mail? Agent Williams asked directly. Mrs. Henderson nodded without hesitation. I was trained in the protocols my first week. We called it community assessment, evaluating each official communication for its potential impact before determining routing. And who made the final decisions about which letters were diverted? Martinez pressed. By my father's time, it was somewhat institutionalized. Certain categories were automatically diverted based on historical precedent. For unique situations, there was a weekly meeting. My father, the mayor, sometimes the police chief or school superintendent. They called it the Community Preservation Committee, though it had no official standing. This revelation expanded the scope significantly. What had begun as isolated postal workers making individual judgment calls had apparently evolved into an informal but structured parallel governance system operating beneath Millfield's official administration. As evening approached and federal investigators prepared to secure the site for the night, Olivia found herself standing in the main lobby, absorbing the day's revelations with mixed emotions. The building she had purchased on desperate impulse had been the epicenter of something far more significant than she had imagined. Not just a postal facility, but the physical infrastructure of a community's attempt to navigate between federal authority and local autonomy. Mrs. Henderson approached as Olivia stood contemplating a wall of Postal Service commemorative plaques. You're thinking about what happens next, aren't you? The older woman asked perceptively. I'm not sure there is a next that makes sense, Olivia admitted. I bought this building thinking I might live upstairs and run a small business downstairs. Now it's the center of a federal investigation into decades of mail tampering. Not exactly the fresh start I had in mind. Mrs. Henderson smiled gently. Or perhaps exactly the fresh start you needed, just not in the form you expected. This building has always served Millfield one way or another. Perhaps its purpose isn't finished yet. As Olivia prepared to leave for the night, Dr. Chen approached with an official-looking document. The National Archives would like to formally request your consultation services throughout the documentation process, he explained. Your archival expertise combined with your status as property owner makes you uniquely qualified. It would be a paid position, of course. The offer represented more than employment. It was recognition of her professional value at a moment when her career had seemed finished. More importantly, it offered Olivia a defined role in shaping how this discovery would be understood and preserved for future study. I'd be honored, she replied, accepting the preliminary paperwork. Outside, the spring evening had turned cool, a light breeze carrying the scent of approaching rain. Olivia stood on the post office steps, looking out at Millfield's quiet main street with new eyes. 3 days ago, this had been an unfamiliar town where she had made a desperate financial gamble. Now she saw it as a community with a complex history of resilience, resistance, and moral complexity, a history in which she had unexpectedly become entangled. As raindrops began to fall, Olivia made a decision. Instead of returning to her Westbrook apartment, she would stay in Millfield. Tonight, the post office's second floor included what had once been an employee rest area with basic amenities. With the federal team's permission, she could begin the transition that had been her original intention, making this historic building her home, whatever complicated history it contained. The rain intensified as Olivia re-entered the building, closing the heavy oak door behind her. The sound of raindrops on the roof created a gentle percussion throughout the cavernous space. For the first time since discovering the hidden room and its thousands of diverted letters, she felt something unexpected, a sense of belonging, of purpose restored. Whatever happened next, with the investigation, the diverted letters, her own professional future, Olivia knew she had found more than a building in Millfield. She had found a story that needed telling, a history that needed preservation, and perhaps most importantly, a community that had developed its own imperfect but profoundly human solutions to the challenges of its time. As the storm intensified outside, Olivia sat at the postmaster's desk where 3 generations of Millfield's postal leaders had made decisions that shaped countless lives. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more ethical complexities, more challenges to her understanding of right and wrong, institution and community. For tonight, it was enough to know that sometimes the most desperate gambles lead to the most profound discoveries. Not just of hidden rooms and diverted letters, but of purpose, meaning, and unexpected belonging. Dawn broke over Millfield with the soft pink light of early spring, filtering through the arched windows of the post office's second floor, where Olivia had spent her first night as the building's resident. She woke to the muffled sounds of the federal investigation team arriving below, their voices echoing in the marble-floored lobby as they resumed their methodical work. After washing up in the small bathroom she had made functional with basic supplies, Olivia descended the stairs to find the investigation in full swing. What had begun as a shocking discovery had evolved into a coordinated operation involving multiple federal agencies, each with distinct but overlapping interests in the thousands of diverted letters. "Good morning," Inspector Martinez greeted, her extending a cup of coffee from the now-established break area. "We've made significant progress overnight. The document preservation team worked through until 3 a.m., processing the Vietnam-era materials." "Any new revelations?" Olivia asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Several," Martinez confirmed. The pattern during Vietnam differs significantly from World War II. The earlier diversions appear more focused on economic protection, preserving essential workers. Vietnam-era diversions show a more political dimension. Draft notices for community leaders' sons, surveillance notifications for anti-war activists, security clearance investigations for teachers and public employees with progressive leanings. This evolution made sense given what they had learned from Howard Green and Sarah Henderson. What had begun as a pragmatic response to wartime economic pressures had developed into something more ideologically complex, a system for insulating the community from federal actions perceived as harmful or unjust. Dr. Chen joined their conversation, his academic enthusiasm barely contained beneath his professional demeanor. "We're establishing fascinating historical patterns," he explained, guiding Olivia to a table where he had arranged diverted letters in chronological groupings. "These aren't random acts of mail tampering. They represent a coherent alternative governance system that evolved over decades." The historian had created a timeline correlating diverted letters with major national and local events. Economic downturns, wars, political movements, changes in federal policy. Patterns emerged that suggested the postal workers hadn't merely been protecting individuals, but attempting to buffer the entire community from external disruptions. "It's like they were creating shock absorbers," Olivia observed, cushioning Millfield from the most damaging impacts of national policy shifts. "Exactly," Dr. Chen agreed. "And what's particularly fascinating is how this system adapted over time. Under William Green in the 1940s and 50s, it focused primarily on economic protection. Under James Henderson in the late 60s and 70s, it expanded to include political and social insulation during the cultural upheavals of that period. The morning's work brought a new dimension to the investigation as Agent Williams began interviewing former Millfield residents who had been identified as intended recipients of diverted mail. Most were elderly now, their lives having unfolded without knowledge of federal communications that might have altered their trajectories. Harold Jennings, 93, had never received his veterans' benefit notifications after returning from World War II. "I always wondered why my army buddies from other towns got those checks," he told investigators. "Figured my paperwork got lost. Ended up working at the mill for 40 years instead." Martha Kellerman, 72, had never received notification of her acceptance to a federal arts program in 1968. "I stayed in Millfield, married my high school boyfriend, raised our children here," she explained. "Sometimes I wondered what might have happened if I'd pursued art professionally, but life turned out well enough." One by one, the human consequences of the mail diversion system emerged. Lives not necessarily harmed, but undeniably altered by decisions made without their knowledge or consent. Some reacted with anger upon learning what had been kept from them, others with philosophical acceptance, and a surprising number with retrospective approval of the system that had shaped their community. "They thought they were protecting us," Raymond Sullivan, 68, observed after learning his draft notice for Vietnam had been diverted. "Can't say I'm sorry to have missed that war, though I would have gone if I'd known. But that's the thing about Millfield. Folks looked after each other, even when the methods weren't exactly by the book." By midday, the emotional weight of these personal stories had created a subdued atmosphere among the investigation team. These weren't just historical documents being catalogued. They were intimate interruptions in real people's lives, decision points diverted without their knowledge, paths not taken because the information that might have led them there had been deliberately withheld. During a brief lunch break, Olivia stepped outside for fresh air and perspective. Main Street Millfield was showing signs of renewed interest. Curious locals walked slowly past the post office. A few journalists remained stationed across the street, and several cars with out-of-town license plates suggested the story was drawing visitors from surrounding communities. Rachel Martinez pulled up in her sensible sedan, waving enthusiastically as she parked. "I had to come see this for myself," she explained, hugging Olivia. "The Historical Society board is having conniptions about missing this discovery. They're talking about offering you your job back just to associate themselves with the find." "Too late," Olivia replied with unexpected confidence. "The National Archives has already contracted me as a consulting archivist for the duration of the investigation, and I'm thinking beyond that now." Rachel studied her friend with surprise. "You seem different. 3 days ago you were devastated about losing your job." 3 days ago I thought my career was the only thing that gave me value," Olivia admitted. "Now I realize there are bigger questions I want to engage with. This isn't just about preserving documents. It's about understanding how communities navigate between institutional authority and local autonomy, how people make impossible ethical choices when systems fail them." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the post office entrance. A group of elderly Millfield residents had gathered, engaged in animated discussion with Agent Williams. As Olivia approached, she recognized several faces from the investigation interviews, former recipients of diverted mail now demanding to speak with authorities about the discovery. Rather than expressing anger at the interference with their mail, however, this group had come with a different purpose. Their spokesperson, Eleanor Wilson, a former school teacher in her 80s, addressed Agent Williams with dignified determination. "We've come to provide context," she explained. "You're investigating what happened with those letters, but you can't understand the why without understanding Millfield itself. We lived through those decades. We knew these postal workers as neighbors and friends. We want to share our community's perspective." Agent Williams looked uncertainly toward Inspector Martinez, who had joined them. Protocol didn't typically include community testimony beyond specific witness statements, but Dr. Chen intervened with a historian's appreciation for broader context. "This is invaluable perspective," he argued. "These residents can provide the social context essential for interpreting the diverted mail system correctly." Martinez considered this, then nodded. "We can set up a formal community documentation session. Ms. Parker, given your archival background, would you be willing to coordinate this aspect? It falls outside our investigative parameters, but could provide important historical context." Within an hour, the post office lobby had been transformed into an impromptu oral history center. Olivia, drawing on her archival training, organized a structured documentation process. Elderly residents signed release forms, then shared their recollections of Millfield during the decades when the mail diversion system operated. Younger residents contributed family stories passed down from parents and grandparents. The composite picture that emerged was complex and nuanced. Millfield had once been a thriving mill town, economically vulnerable but socially cohesive. When external pressures threatened that cohesion, economic downturns, wartime manpower demands, political investigations, the community had developed informal systems to protect itself. The postal diversion operation was apparently just one facet of a broader community self-preservation approach. During the Depression, we had our own script system when banks failed, Arthur Collins, 91, explained. During McCarthy's investigations, teachers warned each other about loyalty questionnaires. During Vietnam, the doctor would find medical exemptions for boys whose families couldn't afford to lose them. The post office was just part of how Millfield looked after its own. Marjorie Winters, 87, added another dimension. Millfield was isolated, geographically and economically. Federal policies made in Washington rarely accounted for our specific circumstances. The men and women who worked at this post office weren't criminals. They were stewards trying to buffer harmful impacts on people they knew personally. These testimonies created a profound shift in how the investigation team viewed their work. What had begun as documentation of postal fraud had evolved into something more anthropologically complex, the study of a community that had developed its own adaptive systems in response to perceived threats from external authority. By late afternoon, even Agent Williams' perspective had softened. "This doesn't excuse the legal violations," she noted to Olivia privately, "but context matters for how we frame our findings and recommendations. This wasn't malicious interference. It was a misguided attempt at community protection that crossed legal boundaries." As evening approached, the community documentation session concluded with an unexpected proposal from Eleanor Wilson and her group of elderly residents. They requested permission to form a community advisory committee that would work alongside federal investigators to determine appropriate resolutions for the diverted letters. "These communications affected our lives," Wilson explained. "We believe we should have input into how they're handled now, 70 or 50 or 30 years later." After consultation with their respective agencies, the federal team tentatively agreed, establishing parameters for community involvement that respected legal requirements while acknowledging the unique circumstances. The diverted mail would remain in federal custody during investigation, but recommendations for resolution would include community input. As residents departed and the investigation team secured the site for the night, Olivia remained behind in what was now simultaneously a federal evidence repository, a historical archive, and her temporary home. The second floor's sparse accommodations had been supplemented by necessities brought from her apartment, enough to make the space livable while she determined her next steps. Sitting at a desk near the window overlooking Main Street, Olivia found herself contemplating not just her personal future, but the building's potential role in Millfield's next chapter. The post office had once served as more than a mail distribution center. It had been a community institution, a buffer between external pressures and local needs, a physical embodiment of how this small town navigated its relationship with larger systems. Could it serve a similar purpose again, though in a different form? The question lingered as Olivia reviewed notes from the day's community documentation sessions, identifying themes and patterns that might inform the building's future use. Her contemplation was interrupted by a soft knock at the side entrance. Inspector Martinez stood there, holding a file folder and looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'm not disturbing your evening?" he asked. "Not at all," Olivia assured him. "Just thinking about all the stories we heard today." Martinez nodded, entering and taking a seat across from her desk. "That's actually why I'm here. The testimonies changed something for me today, how I'm viewing this investigation and its potential outcomes." He placed the folder on the desk. Between them, "These are draft recommendations I'm preparing for my supervisors. The legal facts remain unchanged. Federal mail was deliberately diverted over decades in violation of numerous statutes. But how we frame those violations matters significantly for what happens next." "What are the options?" Olivia asked. "Technically, this could be prosecuted as a criminal conspiracy, though that seems increasingly inappropriate given the community, context, and the advanced age or deceased status of those involved," Martinez explained. "Alternatively, it could be documented as a historical anomaly with recommendations for procedural changes to prevent recurrence." He opened the folder, revealing a third section. "But I'm considering recommending something different, framing this as a case study in community resilience and adaptation, documenting both the legal violations and the contextual factors that led to them, then using Millfield's experience to inform more responsive federal policies in similar communities." The recommendation represented a profound shift from standard protocol, acknowledging wrongdoing while simultaneously learning from the underlying motivations rather than simply punishing the violations. That's unusually nuanced for a federal investigation, Olivia observed. Martinez smiled slightly. The longer I do this work, the more I recognize that legal absolutes rarely capture the full human reality. What happened here was wrong, by statute, but emerged from genuine community concern. Acknowledging both truths seems the only honest approach. Their conversation continued as darkness fell outside, the post office windows reflecting their images against the night. Martinez shared insights from decades of postal investigations, while Olivia offered historical parallels from her archival research. Without explicitly stating it, both recognized they were engaged in something beyond professional collaboration, finding common ground in their respective commitments to truth and context. When Martinez finally departed, promising to return in the morning with updates from overnight document processing, Olivia remained at the window, watching Millfield's quiet main street. A few businesses remained open, a diner with neon lights, a convenience store on the corner, but most buildings stood dark, many with "for lease" signs, visible even at night. The town had declined significantly since its manufacturing heyday, a pattern repeated across countless American communities as industries relocated and economic foundations eroded. Yet something resilient remained in Millfield's community fabric, evident in how elderly residents had rallied to provide context for the investigation, how storekeepers had brought lunch for the federal team, how local history remained vivid. In collective memory, morning brought new dimensions to the investigation as technical analysts completed their assessment of the hidden room's construction. What had appeared to be a simple false wall concealing diverted mail turned out to be a carefully engineered space with climate control considerations far beyond typical 1950s construction standards. Whoever designed this understood document preservation, the structural engineer explained, showing Olivia and the federal team his findings. The wall contains materials that regulate humidity and temperature. There's a passive ventilation system that prevents mold while maintaining stable conditions. This wasn't just hidden storage, it was a purposefully designed archive. This revelation shifted understanding of the diverted mail operation once again. The postal workers hadn't simply hidden mail they were diverting, they had created specialized preservation conditions that suggested they viewed these documents as historically significant, worth protecting for future discovery. They knew someday this would be found, Dr. Chen realized. They were preserving evidence of their own activities for future evaluation. Eleanor Matthews' journal confirmed this interpretation. An entry from 1952 read, "The special room construction was completed today. William insists on proper preservation protocols, acid-free storage, humidity control, organized cataloging. Someday they'll find these," he says. "When they do, I want them to understand we acted with care and purpose, not carelessness or malice." By mid-morning, the investigation had expanded to include architectural historians documenting the hidden room's construction as an early example of specialized document preservation technology. What had begun as evidence of wrongdoing was simultaneously being recognized as an innovative archival space created by people with no formal training but deep practical understanding of document preservation. This duality, illegal interference, coupled with careful preservation, characterized every aspect of the Millfield discovery. The more the team learned, the more complex the ethical picture became. These postal workers had broken laws while following a distinct moral code, violated federal regulations while adhering to community standards, interfered with official communications while preserving them for eventual historical assessment. Around noon, a delegation arrived that further complicated the investigation's trajectory. Representatives from the Smithsonian Institution's National Postal Museum had learned of the discovery and traveled to Millfield to evaluate its significance for possible exhibition and research. This represents an undocumented dimension of American postal history, Dr. Lydia Montgomery, the museum's chief curator, explained after touring the hidden room. While we don't condone the legal violations, the preservation effort itself is historically significant. A community-created archive operating outside official channels but with sophisticated conservation methods. Dr. Montgomery proposed a potential resolution that bridged institutional and community interests, a collaborative exhibition that would preserve the hidden room as a historical installation while acknowledging both the legal violations and the community context that produced them. The Millfield Post Office could become an affiliate site of the National Postal Museum, she suggested, a place where visitors learn about this community's unique response to federal policies while exploring broader questions about institutional authority and local autonomy. The proposal offered Olivia an unexpected path forward. What she had purchased as a desperate financial gamble might become not just her home, but a nationally recognized historical site, one that provided ongoing income through tourism while preserving the building's significance. As federal investigators and museum representatives discussed logistics, Olivia stepped outside for fresh air and perspective. Main Street looked different today. More people walking, vehicles slowing as they passed the post office. A sense of renewed energy that had been absent during her previous visits to Millfield. Rachel joined her on the post office steps, having returned to witness developments. The coffee shop owner told me business has doubled since the discovery hit the news, she reported. The diner's seen a 30% increase. People are coming to Millfield. Because of what you found? I didn't really find anything, Olivia demurred. I just happened to be the person who bought the building. Don't diminish what's happening here, Rachel insisted. You recognized the architectural anomaly, investigated properly instead of just destroying the wall during renovation, contacted authorities instead of exploiting the discovery, and you're bridging the gap between federal investigation and community history. None of that is accidental. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mayor Davis, Millfield's current administrator, a woman in her 50s who had grown up in the community during the final years of the mail diversion system. She introduced herself with the direct manner of small-town governance. Ms. Parker, I've been following developments closely. The town council met in emergency session last night to discuss implications for Millfield. We'd like to formally support the museum partnership proposal and offer municipal cooperation for whatever comes next. The mayor's perspective was pragmatic but visionary. Millfield has been declining for decades as manufacturing disappeared. We've tried various economic development approaches with limited success. This discovery could become the anchor for a different kind of revitalization: heritage tourism, historical research, educational programming. Before Olivia could respond, the mayor continued with unexpected candor. I grew up here. My father worked at the mill. When it closed in 1982, 200 families lost their livelihoods overnight. Federal assistance programs were inadequate. Too little, too late, too bureaucratic. I understand why previous generations developed their own systems when official channels failed them. This acknowledgement from Millfield's current leadership added another dimension to the community context surrounding the diverted mail operation. The system hadn't operated in opposition to local governance, but apparently with its tacit support, or at least understanding, a recognition that communities sometimes require adaptive strategies when formal systems prove unresponsive to local needs. By late afternoon, The various stakeholders had coalesced around a preliminary framework for resolving the Millfield discovery. The diverted mail would be processed according to postal regulations, with attempts made to deliver time-sensitive communications to recipients or their descendants. The historical significance would be preserved through the museum partnership, documenting both the legal violations and their community context. And the building itself would be restored as a historical site, with Olivia as its steward. As federal teams began preparing their final reports, and museum representatives sketched initial exhibition concepts, Olivia found herself standing in what had once been the postmaster's office, the room where William Green and James Henderson had made countless decisions about which communications to divert, which community members to protect, which federal policies to buffer. The enormity of their actions settled over her with new weight. These postal workers had taken upon themselves powers no individual should rightfully hold, determining which citizens received which government communications, effectively altering life trajectories without consent. Yet they had done so not for personal gain, but from a deeply held conviction that their community required protection from systems that didn't adequately account for local realities. As the day's activities concluded and teams departed for the evening, Olivia remained in the building that had become simultaneously her home, a federal investigation site, and potentially a national historical landmark. The transformation mirrored her own journey, from unemployed archivist facing financial ruin to steward of a historically significant discovery that might reshape her professional identity and purpose. Sitting at the postmaster's desk as evening shadows lengthened across the marble floor, Olivia opened Eleanor Matthews' journal to its final entries. The last dated note was from June 1978, just before the post office closed its operations and transferred to the regional facility. "Today, we sealed the special collection room," Matthews had written. William's vision was that someday, when the time was right, someone would find these letters and understand what we tried to do here, not just diverting mail, but preserving a community's ability to determine its own future against forces that would have dismantled it piece by piece. We made difficult choices, crossed lines we were taught never to cross. History will judge whether we were right or wrong. All I know is that Millfield survived when similar towns collapsed, and if our actions contributed to that survival, I cannot bring myself to regret them. As darkness fell outside and Millfield's quiet evening routines unfolded beyond the post office walls, Olivia closed the journal with a sense of profound connection to Eleanor Matthews and the postal workers who had created the hidden room. They had violated laws while following a moral compass oriented toward community preservation. They had interfered with federal authority while creating systems to protect local autonomy. They had diverted official communications while preserving them for eventual historical judgment. These contradictions didn't excuse their actions, but contextualized them within the complex reality of a community, navigating between competing values. Legal compliance versus local resilience, institutional authority versus community need, individual rights versus collective well-being. Tomorrow would bring more decisions, more negotiations between federal agencies and local stakeholders, more details to resolve about the building's future and Olivia's role within it. But tonight, in the quiet of the historic space she had purchased out of desperation and discovered was filled with multi-dimensional significance, Olivia felt something unexpected taking root. Not just professional purpose restored, but a deeper sense of connection to the ongoing conversation between communities and the systems that govern them. The Millfield Post Office had once served as a buffer between external pressures and local needs. Perhaps it could serve that purpose again, not by diverting mail, but by creating space for honest exploration of how communities navigate when systems designed to serve them prove inadequate or disconnected from local realities. As Olivia finally prepared for sleep in her improvised second-floor quarters, she realized that her desperate financial gamble had yielded something far more valuable than property ownership. It had connected her to a community's story, to questions that transcended her individual circumstances, to a purpose that might shape not just her own future, but contribute to broader understanding of how communities survive and adapt when faced with external pressures beyond their control. Outside her window, Millfield's main street lay quiet under streetlights that illuminated for lease signs and empty storefronts, evidence of economic challenges that had accumulated over decades. Yet now there was something new in the atmosphere, a sense of possibility sparked by the discovery within the old post office walls. Perhaps this small town's hidden history might become the foundation for its next chapter, a transformation as unexpected and potentially significant as Olivia's own journey from unemployed archivist to steward of a national historical discovery. The soft chimes of Olivia's phone alarm pulled her from sleep just as dawn light began filtering through the arched windows of the post office's second floor. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. The unfamiliar ceiling, the distant sounds of early morning traffic on Main Street, the musty scent of aged wood and paper. Then memory crystallized. This was her building now, her home, her unexpected responsibility. 1 week had passed since the federal investigation team had completed their on-site work, taking with them carefully catalogued evidence while leaving behind a transformed understanding of both the building and Millfield itself. The diverted letters had been removed to a specialized facility where postal authorities would determine appropriate resolution for each piece, some to be delivered to recipients or descendants with explanatory context, others preserved for historical documentation. Olivia swung her legs over the edge of her makeshift bed and stretched, surveying the space that was gradually transforming from temporary accommodation to intentional living quarters. The second floor's former administrative offices offered ample room for a proper apartment once renovations were complete. For now, she managed with basics brought from her Westbrook rental, a futon mattress, minimal kitchenware, clothing, and essential toiletries. After a quick shower in the bathroom she'd made functional with interim repairs, Olivia dressed and descended to the main floor, where morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating marble floors and brass fixtures that had regained some luster after basic cleaning. The space that had recently hummed with investigative activity now stood quiet, awaiting its next purpose. That purpose was the focus of today's meeting, the first formal gathering of what had been dubbed the Millfield Postal Heritage Committee. Representatives from the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum would join local officials, community members, and Olivia herself to develop a framework for transforming the former post office into an educational site that preserved its unique history. Checking her watch, Olivia realized she had 2 hours before the meeting commenced, the perfect window to continue the work she had begun in quiet moments between official obligations, documenting her personal reflections on the discovery and its implications, both for Millfield and for broader understanding of community resilience. Setting up her laptop at the former service counter, Olivia opened the document she had titled Beyond Diversion, Reflections on Community Adaptation and Resilience. What had begun as private processing had evolved into something with potential, scholarly significance, an analysis of how communities develop alternative systems when formal institutions fail to meet their needs. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, continuing a section on ethical complexity. The Millfield postal workers operated within a moral framework distinct from, but not entirely separate from, legal structures. They recognized legal boundaries, but deemed certain community needs more immediate and consequential than strict adherence to regulations. This wasn't lawlessness, but an alternative ethical system that prioritized community preservation over institutional compliance when the two came into conflict. The moral calculus evident in Eleanor Matthews' journal reveals careful consideration rather than casual disregard for legal obligations. Matthews and her colleagues weighed potential harms against perceived benefits, creating informal but consistent guidelines for determining which communications warranted diversion. These weren't arbitrary decisions, but resulted from an evolved community ethics responding to structural inadequacies in how federal systems interfaced with local realities. The writing flowed easily, drawing connections between Millfield's experience and similar adaptations documented in other communities facing economic displacement, policy disruption, or institutional abandonment. As she wrote, Olivia realized her perspective had fundamentally shifted from when she'd first purchased the building, from seeing it merely as potential business property to understanding it as a physical embodiment of community adaptation, worthy of preservation precisely because it documented both institutional failure and local response. At 9:30, Olivia saved her work and prepared for the meeting, arranging chairs in a semicircle in the lobby and setting up refreshments on a side table. The committee members arrived punctually at 10. Dr. Montgomery from the Smithsonian, Mayor Davis, and 2 town council members, Howard Green, representing the historical perspective, and 3 community representatives selected for their connections to families affected by the mail diversion system. Welcome to the first official meeting of the Millfield Postal Heritage Committee, Mayor Davis began after introductions. We're gathered to develop a framework for preserving this building's unique history while creating educational opportunities for visitors and economic benefits for our community. Dr. Montgomery followed with a presentation outlining the Smithsonian's proposed partnership. What we envision is not simply a static museum display, but an interactive educational site that engages visitors with complex questions about community autonomy, institutional authority, and adaptive responses to systemic failures. The concept she presented would preserve the hidden room as the centerpiece of the experience, with surrounding exhibits providing historical context, personal stories from affected community members, and analysis of the ethical dimensions. Most importantly, the site would connect Millfield's specific experience to broader patterns of community adaptation across American history. We're particularly interested in the duality of this discovery, Dr. Montgomery explained. These postal workers simultaneously violated federal regulations while adhering to sophisticated document preservation standards. They interfered with official communications while carefully maintaining records of those interventions. This complexity offers unique educational opportunities. As the committee discussed implementation details, Howard Green provided valuable historical perspective. My father never spoke of this as resistance or defiance, he noted. He described it as stewardship, protecting the community when outside forces threaten to undermine its foundations. Whether that justifies the actions is for others to decide, but understanding the motivation matters for accurate historical representation. By midday, the committee had established preliminary agreements. The Smithsonian would provide curatorial expertise and inclusion in national programming. The town would support infrastructure improvements and marketing, and Olivia, as building owner, would retain certain usage rights while accommodating public access to historical exhibits. Which brings us to the question of your vision for the space, Mayor Davis said, turning to Olivia. Beyond the historical exhibits, how do you envision utilizing the portions of the building designated for your personal use? The question prompted Olivia to articulate something that had been forming in her mind throughout the past week. a concept that aligned her professional background with the building's historical significance and the community's current needs. "I'm considering establishing a community archives and research center," she explained. "A space where Millfield residents can preserve their own historical materials, research local history, and document ongoing community developments. The second floor could house both my private living quarters and public research facilities." The concept resonated immediately with committee members. Howard Green nodded appreciatively, a forward-looking compliment to the historical exhibits, not just preserving the past, but actively documenting the present for future understanding. "And addressing a significant gap in local resources," added Councilwoman Rodriguez. "Since the county consolidated library services, Millfield has lacked research facilities. This could serve educational needs while attracting visitors interested in local history research." As the meeting continued, Olivia's concept expanded through collaborative input. The community archives would include digitization equipment for family photographs and documents, oral history recording capabilities, and research support for community members exploring their local connections. It would function as both preservation space and active community resource. "This approach beautifully bridges past and future," Dr. Montgomery observed. "Visitors will experience the historical exhibits documenting past community adaptation while witnessing ongoing documentation of contemporary community life." By the meeting's conclusion at 2 p.m., the committee had established a comprehensive framework. The main floor would house the Smithsonian-affiliated exhibits centered around the hidden room. The second floor would combine Olivia's private apartment with the community archives and research center, and the basement would be renovated for document storage, preservation activities, and mechanical systems. As committee members departed with assigned tasks for implementation, Olivia remained in the building alone, overwhelmed by how rapidly her circumstances had transformed. 1 month ago, she had been an unemployed archivist facing financial ruin. Now she stood as both property owner and steward of a nationally significant historical site, with professional purpose not merely restored, but expanded beyond her previous institutional constraints. The afternoon stretched before her with no further obligations. After making tea in her improvised kitchen area, Olivia decided to explore the building more thoroughly than immediate necessities had previously allowed. Beyond the spaces already dedicated to specific functions, the former post office contained numerous alcoves, storage areas, and architectural features that might serve future needs or reveal additional historical significance. One such area, a former mail sorting room adjacent to the main lobby, particularly intrigued her. Unlike other spaces that had been emptied when the facility closed in 1978, this room still contained built-in sorting shelves, work tables, and what appeared to be a pneumatic tube system terminal, remnants of postal operations that might be incorporated into historical exhibits. As Olivia examined the pneumatic tube terminal, she noticed something odd. Unlike other abandoned equipment that showed decades of dust accumulation, this apparatus appeared to have been maintained after the facility's official closure. The brass fittings retained some polish, and the mechanical components showed signs of lubrication more recent than 1978. Curious, she followed the visible portion of the tube where it entered the wall, trying to determine its routing through the building. The pneumatic systems had once connected multiple workstations, allowing rapid transfer of paperwork before electronic communications became standard. This particular tube appeared to connect the sorting room with somewhere else in the building. After tracing the visible section to where it disappeared into the wall, Olivia consulted the architectural plans Dr. Chen had obtained during the investigation. According to these documents, the pneumatic system had connected the sorting room with the postmaster's office and the loading dock, a standard configuration for facilities of this era. Yet something nagged at her historical instinct, the same sense that had prompted her to investigate the architectural anomaly, revealing the hidden room. If the postal workers had created sophisticated concealment for diverted mail, might they have established other systems for their alternative operations? Returning to the sorting room, Olivia examined the pneumatic terminal more carefully, noting a series of numbered stations on the destination dial. Stations 1 and 2 were clearly labeled Postmaster and Loading Dock, respectively, but a third setting, marked simply 3, had no corresponding label. Heart quickening with the historian's thrill of potential discovery, Olivia considered the implications. The hidden room had been sealed and concealed, designed for long-term document storage. But the daily operations of the mail diversion system would have required efficient communication and document transfer between involved employees, exactly what a pneumatic system could provide. After examining the mechanism carefully, Olivia turned the dial to station 3 and pressed the activation lever. The system hummed to life with surprising readiness, suggesting maintenance far more recent than the building's official closure. Air rushed through the tube with a distinctive whooshing sound, continuing longer than the short distances to documented destinations would require. When the system fell silent, Olivia waited, unsure what response might come. Minutes passed with no apparent result. Just as she began to question her theory, the terminal chimed softly, and the receiving basket rotated into position, now containing a small cardboard tube, the standard carrier for pneumatic systems. With careful hands, Olivia extracted the carrier and opened it, finding a single sheet of paper inside. The message, typed on what appeared to be a 1970s-era electric typewriter, read simply, "Confirmation receipt requested. Identify yourself and purpose." The paper bore no signature or letterhead, only the typed message, evidence that someone had received her pneumatic transmission and responded. Someone, somewhere in the building or connected to it, was actively monitoring the secret third station of a supposedly abandoned communication system. Olivia stared at the message, possibilities racing through her mind. The federal investigation had concluded that the mail diversion operation ended when the post office closed in 1978, with no evidence of continued activity. Yet this response suggested otherwise, that some aspect of the system remained operational, or at least monitored more than 40 years later. After careful consideration, Olivia typed a response on her laptop, printed it using the small portable printer she had brought for documentation work, and inserted it into the carrier. Olivia Parker, current owner of Millfield Post Office Building, discovered hidden room and diverted mail collection, seeking to understand full historical context for preservation purposes. She sent the carrier through the system, then waited, questions multiplying. Who might be monitoring the other end? A former postal employee maintaining the system out of habit or dedication? Some community continuation of the diversion operation? A historical preservationist who had discovered the system as she had? 20 minutes passed with no response. Olivia used the time to document her discovery, photographing the pneumatic terminal and recording her observations and actions. Just as she began to wonder if her response had been too direct, the terminal chimed again, delivering another carrier. This message, longer than the first, read, "Ms. Parker, your discovery has activated contingency protocols established in 1978. The Millfield Community Preservation Committee continues to exist, though its methods have evolved beyond mail diversion. We have monitored your actions since purchase and approve your preservation approach. If you wish to understand the complete context, place Eleanor Matthews' journal in the carrier at 10:30 p.m. tonight. It will be returned with additional documentation. By morning?" The implications stunned Olivia. The Community Preservation Committee mentioned in Sarah Henderson's testimony apparently hadn't disbanded when the post office closed, but had transformed its operations while maintaining connection to the original facilities. The mail diversion might have ended, but the community protection system it represented had evolved into something else entirely. Ethical questions immediately surfaced. Should she inform the federal investigators about this discovery? Their official work had concluded, findings submitted, recommendations filed. Reopening the investigation would complicate the carefully balanced resolution that respected both legal requirements and community context. More importantly, the message suggested additional historical documentation existed, information that would enhance understanding of how Millfield's alternative governance system had evolved beyond its postal origins. As both building owner and historian, Olivia felt responsibility to preserve this context, whatever its current implications. After careful reflection, she decided to proceed as requested, not from disregard for legal obligations, but from commitment to complete historical documentation. She would comply with the instructions, review whatever materials were provided, then determine appropriate next steps based on their content and implications. The remaining hours until 10 p.m. passed with excruciating slowness. Olivia continued routine activities, unpacking additional personal items from her Westbrook apartment, preparing a simple dinner in her makeshift kitchen, responding to emails from committee members about implementation details, all while her thoughts circled the pneumatic message and its mysterious sender. At precisely 10 p.m., Olivia returned to the sorting room with Eleanor Matthews' journal. After a moment's hesitation, she placed it in the pneumatic carrier, added a note requesting careful handling of the historical document, and sent it through the system to Station 3. The whooshing sound seemed louder in the nighttime quiet of the building, a tangible connection to whatever continuation of Millfield's alternative governance system remained active. With the journal dispatched and no immediate response expected, Olivia returned to her second-floor quarters. Sleep proved elusive as questions multiplied in her mind. Who comprised this modern Community Preservation Committee? How had they monitored her actions since purchase? What methods had replaced mail diversion when that became impossible? And most pressingly, what additional documentation might they provide about the system's evolution? Morning light found Olivia already awake, having slept fitfully between speculative dreams. She dressed quickly and descended to the sorting room, finding the pneumatic terminal's receiving basket, now containing a carrier significantly larger than standard, a modified canister that barely fit through the tube system. Inside she found Eleanor Matthews' journal returned alongside 3 additional items: a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be meeting minutes spanning 1978 to the present, a flash drive labeled Digital Archives 1990-2025, and a handwritten letter addressed to her personally. The letter, written in elegant cursive on high-quality stationery, provided context for these materials. Ms. Parker, what began in the PIP 1940s as postal workers protecting their community from economic disruption evolved through necessity as communication systems changed. When the post office closed in 1978, the Community Preservation Committee transitioned from mail diversion to other methods of buffering Millfield from harmful external pressures. During the 1980s, as manufacturing declined, our focus shifted to economic insulation, creating cooperative support systems when federal assistance proved inadequate. In the 1990s, as digital communications replaced physical mail, we established information networks ensuring community members received guidance, navigating increasingly complex bureaucratic systems. The materials provided document this evolution, not to justify any legal violations, but to preserve the complete historical context of Millfield's adaptive responses to institutional failures. As the current steward of the physical space where this system originated, you deserve access to its complete history. The committee continues to exist because the conditions that necessitated its formation persist. Communities like Millfield remain vulnerable to policies created without understanding of local contexts. We no longer divert mail or interfere with federal communications, but we maintain systems that help community members navigate institutional complexities when official channels prove inadequate. We offer these records trusting your judgment about their appropriate use. The committee neither seeks publicity nor fears accountability for past actions. We simply believe this history belongs to Millfield itself and should be preserved accurately for future understanding. Should you wish further communication, the pneumatic system remains operational. We monitor Station 3 weekly. Respectfully, the Millfield Community Preservation Committee. Olivia sat with these materials spread before her, recognizing their historical significance while contemplating their contemporary implications. The portfolio and flash drive potentially contained decades of documentation about how Millfield had developed alternative governance systems when official institutions failed to meet community needs. Invaluable historical context for understanding both the mail diversion operation and broader patterns of community adaptation. Yet these materials also suggested ongoing activities that, while perhaps no longer involving legal violations, represented an alternative power structure operating within Millfield, one that had monitored her actions, maintained connection to the building she now owned, and preserved operational systems without official authorization. As morning light strengthened through the sorting room windows, Olivia reached a decision, balancing her obligations as historian, property owner, and citizen. She would review these materials thoroughly, incorporating their historical content into the planned educational exhibits without revealing their contemporary source. She would maintain the pneumatic connection, not as active participant in whatever current operations existed, but as historical documenter of a community's ongoing adaptation. Most importantly, she would ensure the Millfield Postal Heritage Site presented the complete ethical complexity of the mail diversion system and its evolution, acknowledging legal violations while contextualizing them within the community's efforts to protect itself when official systems proved inadequate or harmful. The weeks that followed brought rapid transformation to both the building and Olivia's vision for its future. Renovation crews began selective restoration work, preserving historical elements while adapting spaces for new functions. The Smithsonian team developed detailed exhibition plans centered around the hidden room, but expanding to include the broader context of community adaptation. And Olivia herself established the framework for the Community Archives and Research Center, incorporating both traditional archival practices and innovative approaches to community documentation. Throughout this process, she carefully reviewed the materials provided through the pneumatic system, integrating their historical content into exhibition plans while maintaining discretion about their source. The documentation revealed fascinating evolution of Millfield's alternative governance system, from direct mail diversion to sophisticated information networks, helping community members navigate increasingly complex institutional bureaucracies. 1 month after the committee's initial meeting, the renovation had progressed sufficiently for a preview tour for key stakeholders. Dr. Montgomery arrived from Washington alongside National Postal Museum colleagues, joining Mayor Davis, town council members, and selected community representatives for a first look at the emerging Millfield Postal Heritage Site. "We've preserved the hidden room exactly as discovered," Olivia explained, as the group gathered outside the former concealed entrance, now transformed into a transparent barrier, allowing visitors to view the space without disturbing its contents. The exhibition design will guide visitors through progressive understanding, from initial discovery through historical context to broader implications for community governance. As the tour continued through partially renovated spaces, Olivia outlined how visitors would experience the site, beginning with Millfield's economic history, proceeding through the male diversion discovery, then exploring how communities develop alternative systems when institutional structures fail to meet their needs. "What makes this site nationally significant," Dr. Montgomery noted to the group, "is how it documents both specific historical practices and universal patterns of community adaptation. Visitors will leave understanding not just what happened in Millfield, but how communities throughout American history have navigated tensions between institutional authority and local autonomy." The tour concluded in the former sorting room, where Olivia had established preliminary components of the Community Archives and Research Center. Digital scanning equipment, oral history recording stations, and research terminals demonstrated how the space would serve both preservation and ongoing documentation needs. "This represents the forward-looking dimension of our project," Olivia explained. "While the historical exhibits preserve past adaptations, the community archives actively document present-day Millfield for future understanding. We're creating not just a museum of what was, but a living repository of what is and what might be." As stakeholders departed, expressing enthusiastic support, Olivia remained in the sorting room, contemplating the pneumatic terminal that connected past and present dimensions of Millfield's community governance. She had maintained its functionality while incorporating it into historical exhibits, presenting it as artifact while preserving its potential for ongoing communication. That evening, alone in the building that had become simultaneously her home, a national historical site and a community resource, Olivia drafted a message to the mysterious committee. After careful consideration of ethical and professional obligations, she typed, "I've reviewed the materials provided and incorporated their historical content into exhibition plans while maintaining discretion about contemporary operations. The Millfield Postal Heritage Site will present the complete ethical complexity of community adaptation without compromising current activities. As building steward and historian, I neither endorse nor oppose your continued existence, but acknowledge the persistent conditions that necessitated your formation. The pneumatic connection will remain operational for historical documentation purposes." After sending this message through the terminal to Station 3, Olivia ascended to her second-floor apartment, now partially renovated to combine historical features with modern comforts. From her windows, Main Street displayed early signs of revitalization. The coffee shop had extended hours to accommodate increased visitors. The long, empty furniture store showed signs of renovation activity, and pedestrian traffic had noticeably increased since news of the postal discovery spread. What had begun as Olivia's desperate financial gamble had catalyzed unexpected renewal, not just for her professional identity, but potentially for Millfield itself. The building that had once housed a community's alternative governance system was finding new purpose as both historical preservation site and forward-looking community resource. As twilight deepened over Millfield, Olivia opened her laptop to continue the manuscript that had evolved alongside her understanding of the discovery, beyond diversion, community adaptation, and resilience in institutional gaps. What had begun as personal processing had developed into a scholarly work with potential significance beyond Millfield's specific experience. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, adding a new section. The tension between institutional authority And community autonomy remains unresolved in American governance, by design rather than oversight. This productive friction creates space for innovation when systems align with community needs while necessitating adaptation when they diverge. The Millfield experience demonstrates not lawlessness, but creative navigation of this tension. Imperfect. Solutions emerging when formal structures prove inadequate for local realities. As communities continue facing economic transformation, policy disruption, and institutional limitations, the historical pattern revealed in Millfield offers both caution and inspiration. Caution against substituting unaccountable local authority for democratic processes. Inspiration for developing adaptive responses that preserve community cohesion when external pressures threaten to undermine it. The ethical complexity resists simple judgment, inviting instead deeper examination of how communities and institutions might better align their respective strengths toward shared flourishing. Outside her window, Millfield settled into evening. Routines, lights illuminating storefronts, residents walking home from work, the timeless rhythm of community life continuing despite decades of economic challenges and institutional inadequacies. Within this ordinary scene lay extraordinary resilience, the capacity to develop alternative systems when necessary while maintaining core social fabric. The Millfield Post Office, once the physical infrastructure for an alternative governance system, was finding new purpose as both historical marker and future resource. And Olivia Parker, once an unemployed archivist facing financial ruin, had found unexpected calling as steward of this complex legacy, preserving not just artifacts, but the ethical questions they embodied about how communities navigate between institutional authority and local autonomy when the two come into conflict. As night settled over Millfield, Olivia closed her laptop and moved to the window, watching the quiet street below with deepened appreciation for the complex human systems that sustain communities through challenging transitions. Her desperate, financial gamble had yielded something far more valuable than property ownership: connection to ongoing questions about governance, adaptation, and resilience that transcended Millfield's specific experience while remaining grounded in its particular story. Tomorrow would bring continued renovation, exhibition development, and community engagement. But tonight, in the quiet building that had once housed hidden operations and now promised public education, Olivia Parker felt the rare satisfaction of purpose aligned with place, her professional skills serving not just personal recovery, but potentially contributing to broader understanding of how communities navigate institutional inadequacy with creativity, determination, and profound ethical complexity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.